Let's talk a little bit more about political rhetoric and the ties it has to political violence. Joining us now is ABC News chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl. He's the author of the new book, Tired of Winning, Donald Trump and the End of the Grand Old Party. It is such a treat to have my friends on the show from other networks. I always like it when you write a book, so I can.
It's great to be here. I spent a lot of time with you on the campaign trail.
Yes, we have. So. Let's talk about the book and Donald Trump and his feeling of being okay with inciting political anger, which sometimes can lead to political violence. When you're talking about where he went in the aftermath of January 6th and in the aftermath of his announcement he was running for president, you talk about a town in Texas, and you talk about political violence that could erupt from Waco. Talk to me about that and how it ties into who Donald Trump is and the Donald Trump that he's projecting on the campaign trail now.
Yeah, it wasn't just any campaign, it was the very first rally of his 2024 presidential campaign. He went to Waco, Texas on almost exactly the 30th anniversary of the federal showdown with the Branch Davidian cult at their compound called Mount Carmel, which ended in an inferno that killed more than 80 people and became the rallying cry for far right-wing militias who felt the government was coming out to get them. One of those people was Timothy McVeigh, who 2 years later blew up the Oklahoma City Federal Building in the greatest act of domestic terrorism in American history. And that is the place that Donald Trump announced his campaign.
Trump Davidians.
Trump Davidians is what Steve Bannon, who was his chief strategist in the White House, had a falling out and is right back in with Donald Trump now. He said, "We are the Trump Davidians." It's explicit. The whole theme of the campaign is one of retribution, vengeance, going after Trump's enemies. He says they're coming after me because their real target is you. That's what he tells his people, and therefore we are going to go after them.
So we saw a comfort with violence in 2016, 2015, 2016 that was so surprising at the time. There was a continued comfort with violence while Donald Trump was president. Charlottesville, both sides of him. There's January 6th. I mean, it just gets progressively worse. It's no longer just punching people at rallies, I'll pay your legal bills, or, a protest that goes wildly wrong in Charlottesville. Then it's, an insurrection at the Capitol. It makes you worry about what might happen next.
Well, I mean, shortly after the search of Mar-a-Lago by the FBI, we had a guy go and show up at the Cincinnati field office of the FBI with the intent to kill FBI agents. It's real. The danger has escalated, I think, since 2016. And, he talks in apocalyptic terms about this election. He says 2024 is the final battle, as if we're headed towards some big, event where it's not just voting, it's and by the way, there's something that Steve Bannon told me that has haunted me more than anything that I learned in this book. I went to him at one point and I said, "Aren't you afraid of violence? Aren't you afraid that this will lead to violence?" And he said, without missing a beat, "No, because we're going to win."
And when he says that, do you think that he says we're going to win, it doesn't matter what the results are, we're going to win, or that he actually believes they'll win fair and square?
Well, the implications are that he's so convinced they're going to win that if they don't, who the hell knows what will happen. Look, he thinks that Trump is coming back. He says that, another point he said to me, "You understand we're going to win. You understand this is happening." I'm not so convinced of that at all. I mean, polls are what they are, but it's certainly possible.
Can we talk about the court cases? Because much of Donald Trump's life right now is mired in showing up to court or going through legal briefs or, viewing classified material as part of the case in Florida. On the outside, the team and Donald Trump are projecting confidence, saying that this only helps them, and the polls show that it does. Internally, from your reporting, does he seem more nervous? Is he more worried about what might happen from one or all of these court cases?
My sense is the case that consumes him more than any of them is actually the civil case brought by the New York Attorney General.
The one that he's showing up for.
Yeah, the one that he spent 8 days so far in that courtroom. I mean, he spent more days in that courtroom than he had since early October than he has on the campaign trail. And the campaign and the political cases are now entirely interspersed. But I think it does freak him out, the notion of possible prison time. And I think that's what's given energy to a campaign that, frankly, had no energy when he first announced it a year ago. He is facing a situation where he either wins, I think in his mind, or he potentially goes to prison.
I have one other question, and this is, why do you think that you talk about Kevin McCarthy going back to see Donald Trump after the insurrection. You talked about Ronna McDaniel initially saying that she, worrying that when Donald Trump said he wasn't going to be a part of the Republican Party any longer, that she had to threaten him herself with not paying his legal bills. There's also Lindsey Graham. There are these Republicans in leadership, Republican senators, who said after the insurrection that they were done, and then found themselves crawling back to him. Is it because they were concerned for their own personal safety?
I think that is part of it. Kevin McCarthy told me something just a few days after January 6th. He said to me, there are people back in my district who would storm the Capitol all over again. This was just days after the attack on the Capitol. So I think and Lindsey Graham, of course, had that famous incident when he turned on Trump for about 12 hours. He goes into National Airport and he gets mobbed by Trump supporters, threatening him, browbeating him. So I think there's some of that, but also there's just the naked political calculation. McCarthy wanted to be Speaker of the House. He wanted the Republicans to win back the majority. He felt that he needed to bring Trump in because if Trump left, those people wouldn't come out and vote. Ronna McDaniel, same thing. She felt if Trump went and started his own party, he would never win, but he would take away enough voters that Republicans wouldn't win either. And look at what happened in the aftermath. McCarthy does become Speaker of the House. I mean, to what end? He's no longer Speaker. Ronna McDaniel, she's worried about Republicans losing. They have lost in every single election since 2016. Special elections, midterm elections, runoff elections.
They've lost on issues.
They've lost, so I think the calculation may have proved to be wrong, but that is the calculation they've made. And now, of course, Ronna McDaniel has people calling for her head in terms of her leadership of the RNC, including apparently Donald Trump.
Jonathan Karl, the book is called Tired of Winning. Are you tired of winning it?
Not quite.